Let's jump in to give us a little bit of a rundown about what's been going on with J.K. Rowling. Where did this all start, and when did you start to get worried about it?
Yeah, so I remember in like 2018 or something, she liked a tweet, which was, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was some transphobic nonsense from some transphobe person. And as soon as she liked that, like someone noticed, people notice what celebrities like for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
And the story was, I clicked like by accident or whatever it was. But that caused people to then look at her follow list and notice that, like, obviously you can follow whoever you want. And like, I follow loads of people. I follow, some transphobic people and some men's rights activists and like the whole spectrum, because it's good to. But when someone follows all of the big players from one side of a political spectrum and none from the other, it's usually a sign where they're learning, at least.
What information they're absorbing, what they're putting into that bubble.
So she was following most of the big UK players in gender critical, which is the movement, which is basically the anti-trans rights movement in the UK. And combined with that tweet, it was just a bit too suspicious, and also you could, if you accidentally clicked a tweet like that, you could be like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, like, I support trans people and I support trans rights, and it was totally
right.
Instead, it was just like it was an accident, like
crickets.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like most of my friends were just like, well, she's obviously just transphobic from that moment. But yeah, then it kicked off with when there was a trial here. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect segue. I know that I became aware of this whole situation. And I remember hearing about that liked tweet in the list of followers after the kind of hashtag I stand with Maya situation came about, and people were like, well, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. But that's kind of where it entered my awareness. And I know I started seeing a lot of people that I was following start talking about it after that. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that means, what that hashtag represents?
Yeah, this is quite a big deal, really, because obviously following people and liking tweets by accident every now and then isn't really a stance. Like, even if people are suspicious, no one really cares. But so she tweeted out this tweet saying she stands with someone who there had just been a court case. And that's like suddenly going from not really doing anything to making a huge political stand. So this court case was basically a lady worked for a think tank which deals with like equality and development around the world, and they chose to not renew her contract because of gender critical beliefs, which you could phrase as transphobic beliefs. And there was more to it. This she is a sort of a campaigner for the gender critical movement and is very involved with it. I think so. J.K. Rowling and lots of people have tried to sort of spin it as, oh, she was fired from her job for saying one transphobic thing or something, and that's not the case. It's she's very committed to her beliefs. So this went to court, and the case they actually did was, I think it was like a preliminary trial. I'm not an expert in law in either the UK or the US, so I can't really explain what this means. The idea was basically to test whether it was a legitimate belief. So in order to see if, I guess it's similar to like religious freedom in that, are your beliefs protected as beliefs?
Right.
And the judge, so she went in with this belief that trans women are men and trans men are women, and everyone else is just basically your birth sex, and that was like the belief that she was trying to get protected in court. But here we have something called a gender recognition certificate, which means that legally you are as if you were born
right.
And she said that even in a case when someone has a gender recognition certificate, she would still refuse to refer to them as, or refuse to treat them as their legal sex. And so the judge ruled it was an absolutist view. and come out with this amazing line, which was, "This view is not worthy of respect in a democratic society," which I think is quite an intense thing to be told from a judge.
Wow. Yeah.
I guess that's some legal term. But anyway, so that was the fallout. And the gender critical side are trying to spin this as like you can get fired for saying someone is what you think they are rather than what they're saying they are.
Right.
But there's a line between accidentally misgendering someone once and like serially harassing a trans person because they're trans. And
there's also a line between being fired and just someone deciding not to renew a contract, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance in this, and it's worth reading the court ruling if you feel that I'm spinning it a certain way, because I don't think it's very ambiguous.
And that's something that you brought out in your articles that I really hadn't noticed, that there is so much like active spin from JK, because I think I had it in my mind that this was a case of some rich person with a big microphone holding a really phobic or bigoted belief and then just not doing anything to like stop that. It wasn't until I read the narrative as you kind of lay it out, Katy, to recognize that she's very intentionally and actively of transphobic force.
I think that, I mean, I couldn't necessarily credit her with the decision to spin, because, you know, sometimes people, when you're part of like a political movement or a group, sometimes these spins develop and you that's what you learn, and you're, so one thing that I would say as a criticism of the gender critical movement is that it's part of it almost is to ignore criticism. Like it's very, very ingrained. Like so often, like with my article that I wrote, I posted it around quite a lot of places, and I always try and say, like, I'm trying to come at this like a sort of a skeptical position. I'm saying I've provided a counter argument to everything she said, all sourced. Read it. If you find something wrong or logically inconsistent, I will change my article. And you know, one person has bothered to try, but most people, you know, will just say, "No, I know Katy Montgomerie. Like, don't trust them," or like, "No, this is bullshit," or whatever. And I think it's so ingrained into the general gender critical movement to just particularly dismiss what trans people say. So I think that, you know, I couldn't say that like J.K. Rowling's come up with this idea. It's just so typical. I feel like when she wrote her like essay, I could have written that, because I've spent so long talking to gender critical people. I mean, it was just, it was like, you know, it's almost like reciting the holy text or something.
Yeah, it's always disturbing when you see somebody start repeating language so exactly. When a group of people starts saying the same thing in the same way over and over again, that's kind of your red flag to be like, there is something happening here that is not critical, that's not rational, that's not actually looking at the evidence and coming to conclusion yourself. This is groupthink. And yeah, it's always disturbing to see that, especially from somebody who you may have really, you know, venerated or appreciated in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's certain few phrases that they're like dog whistle phrases. I mean, I guess it's like, you know, with a lot of politics nowadays, someone will say something and on its own, you couldn't, like, it would be, you kind of look mad when, if someone, like, if you know nothing about it and someone just says all lives matter, and then you're like, you're racist. Like, if you didn't know about that, that might seem like an extreme reaction. And I guess that's the whole point in it, is to say things to flag to other people what your position is without saying it. And I think that, like, my biggest frustration that I have when I'm arguing with gender critical people is I'm like, just say your position. Like, if you want to ban all trans women from the toilets, just say it, because then I can argue against it and we can have an argument about it. But if you're going to say, I want to defend sex-based rights and or whatever, then like, I know what you're trying to say. I know what you're dog whistling, because I've talked to 5,000 people before. Just, it's so frustrating. I always feel like I'm never having to dog whistle. I'm never having to I say exactly what my political position just up front. Yeah. So it's very frustrating, and to see that there's quite a lot of that in I think in J.K. Rowling's essay.
Yeah, talking a little bit more about where she's going from that initial standpoint of liking a tweet that was not good, following some people who were really big red flags, and then, tweeting out the hashtag I stand with Maya. All of that can kind of sort of be explained away by people who want to explain it away, right? Oh, well, sure. Maybe she didn't know that this was actually what was going on, or maybe she just saw a hashtag was trending and wanted to trend too. And like, it's not good. Like, none of that is like a good thing to do. Like, research the hashtags and the stuff you're getting behind before you get behind it. But recently it's become just blatant. Like, it's really hard to argue anymore that this is not just full on attack mode. So let's talk a little bit about the more recent tweets that have been coming out from her, and then the couple of essays that she's been just putting out there trying to defend her position. What do you think spurred this shift from kind of defensive to offensive?
Yeah, so maybe something that we'll come back to later. I think that one of the key things in the UK, which is spurring a lot of the gender critical movement, and which has kind of like fueled the fire, is we've got this thing called the Gender Recognition Act, and we've been discussing reforming it for about 3 years now, and that lets you get the thing I mentioned earlier, which is a gender recognition certificate. So anyway, basically, if you're a trans person and you want to change your legal sex, you can change your passport, you can change your driving license, you can change your bank details, you can change everything. But there's a few like stupid loopholes and stuff in the law. For example, if you want to get married, if you want to get married, say if you're a trans woman and you want to get married as a wife, then you need to have one of these gender recognition certificates. Otherwise, legally, they have to call you husband at the wedding, which is just, even if the passport says female on it, which is some nonsense of UK law. But at the moment, so if you want to change your passport, you can, the process is fairly straightforward. But to get one of these gender recognition certificates, you need to get a medical diagnosis. You need to have lived as your new sex for 2 years. There's a few other things. You also have to send off details of all of your medical procedures to some panel. It's all kind of nonsense. And basically, we're just saying, can you make it easier? Some people are having to wait 5+ years to get one of these. And
right.
Like, I'm only just at the point where I can apply for one. And like, I've looked like this and been living my life for years. And if I wanted to get married to someone and I had to wait, it's just pointless. It's not a major law, but it's a good catalyst for the media to spin up fears about trans people. And so anyway, this reform is coming up now, particularly in Scotland, and the rest of the UK are doing it differently. And J.K. Rowling Scottish, lives in Scotland, and the Scottish one is a bit further ahead.
Got it. Okay.
I think that is like I think a lot of, it's something that they've been building up to. So I think that's part of the drive for it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, we're seeing very similar things on this side of the pond, which is mostly a lot of the Supreme Court cases. The Supreme Court has been in session now for a month or two, and they've been handing down a lot of verdicts about a variety of topics. And one is sexual orientation and gender expression, essentially the entire acronym, right? Protected under the 14th Amendment, which says you cannot discriminate based on sex. And what does sex mean? And does that include, transgender people and, gay people and bisexual people and just anybody who has some kind of tie to that word? And so we are also seeing a big discussion kind of reignited out here. And so, thankfully they did change Title 4, the 14th Amendment to actually incorporate the LGBTQ plus community, which is amazing. But it is sparking a lot of the same conversations that I think that you guys must be having as well.
Yeah. I think one of the differences, I don't know if this is jumping ahead a bit, but one of the differences is that the UK government's really been dragging this out, and the media has really been dragging it through the mud. And I think that, I don't know, I knew about this Supreme Court decision in America. I talked to Americans and they weren't even aware of it. Whereas, like, I think every British person in the entire country has at least has some idea that there's something going on in trans rights at the moment. So.
Interesting. I would love to just have like a conversation about the difference between media coverage and politics in these two countries. Just go for that. But that's not what people are here for today. So let's talk a little bit about why do you think that J.K. Rowling is saying these things? Like, what's in it for her? What do you see as her motivation? Certainly not to excuse it in any way, but to understand where the opposition is coming from. Is this something that stems from a personal aspect? Is this more of a everyone else is being an activist, I need to find something, I picked this really awful thing and now I'm all in, like,
of activism.
Right?
Right.
Yeah, why J.K. Rowling? Why?
So I haven't talked to J.K. Rowling, so I couldn't possibly say what her motivations or thoughts are other than what she's written. But I think I've talked to lots, thousands of gender critical people and lots of ex-gender critical people as well. And I think that for a lot of people, at least starting off, it can be built on sort of some negative experience they've had in the past with, sexual assault or something horrible like that. Quite a lot of the ex-gender critical people I've talked to said that what got them into it was, they had some experience of that. This is more common for the women. They've had some horrible experience with men in the past, and they just recognize the need for sometimes some kind of space away from men. And then it's very easy to be if you don't know anything about trans people, it's very easy to be sold this idea of men in dresses coming to shoulder their way into your space. And I think if you've never met a trans person, or if you have met a trans person, you've had a bad experience, which can happen, it makes you think about this. And then this whole kind of almost cult-like movement is ready to feed you with all of these horror stories. I feel like I know the name, first and second name, of every single trans criminal in the world right now, because there's only so many, and they all know all of them, and they've all listed. I've seen all their photos, and they always ask me to explain them and apologize for them. And I think it can be very easy to see this as it's quite triggering, this idea of these perverts come into your spaces and the law just protecting them over protecting you. It's quite easy to sell this idea to people, and I think that radicalizes a lot of people. And I think a lot of other people are homophobic or very traditional family values, and this is an outlet for that. And suddenly it's almost acceptable, because it was acceptable to be homophobic 30 years ago, and now, in England, it's unacceptable to be homophobic. People still are, and you still get celebrities saying bullshit things, but generally it's an unacceptable position, whereas it's kind of acceptable to be transphobic. You're just asking questions, and now you can divert all of your anti-LGBT angst into that instead. And
exactly.
You can see that straight away. They'll be railing on trans people, and then they'll say something about drag queens, and then they'll say something about gay men adopting, and all of a sudden they'll be saying the F word, and whoa, okay. I don't think you're gender critical at all, or well, that's what gender critical covers, but you're claiming to be a feminist and you're actually just a traditional novel. So
no, that's no worries here. It is true. It's more acceptable to be transphobic than it is to be homophobic. Even most places here, probably there are still states and areas that, you know, you can probably get away with being very homophobic, but at least in the more metropolitan areas, yeah, that's not something that's acceptable. And so anybody who still has that issue, of course, they're going to go and find a new way to express that in a way that is more, you know, socially acceptable, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know do we have any calls, Christy? Because I do want to jump real quick into one more question, just kind of about the context, and then we'll jump into a call or two.
All right, great. I'll keep the lines warm.
Sounds good. So I did just want to bring up this letter that we're hearing about now at the beginning of this month in Harper's Bazaar, I believe it is. It's a letter warning about the quote-unquote restriction of debate alongside, and J.K. Rowling has signed it alongside some other notable people such as Noam Chomsky, Margaret Atwood, and Steven Pinker, among others. And I read the letter, and I can see where J.K. Rowling is going in signing this, right? And saying, "Oh, yes, I feel like this is speaking to me, and I can sign off on this because I'm currently being criticized for these harmful views that I'm espousing." But I'm curious what your thoughts are about the letter in general, if you've read it, and kind of what where this came from. Is this something that she kind of spearheaded? Is this something that she just kind of found and was like, yes, I have a personal anecdote to relate to this letter, so I'm going to sign on? Is the letter inherently transphobic? Like, how do you describe this to somebody who's coming across it for the first time?
So I haven't read the letter, so I'm kind of commenting blind, but I know that it's kind of this thing that people have with cancel culture and just the difference between like shutting down someone from having their opinion and criticizing for someone for having a bad opinion. I think that traditionally, like celebrities who everyone hears from, you know, you couldn't voice your opinion to them. If they say something rubbish, they'll be in the newspapers and then that's it. And they can just choose to not read the newspaper. Whereas now with social media, like, you can say, I hate trans people, and if you've got 14 million followers, then you're going to get 7 million people reply to you saying, I hate you. And that's, you know, that's incredible. That must be overwhelming for anyone. And I think that, especially when you have any view, obviously, you don't want it to be shut down, and getting loads of abuse from people is pressure to shut down someone's view. I mean, that is getting loads of abuse shuts down your view. But I think one of the things that lots of the sort of proponents of this kind of thing are missing, like, they often come in this free speech angle. They often say, this is nonsense, they're being cancelled and it's shutting down freedom of speech. But I mean, it is freedom of speech. What are you proposing? That someone with 14 million followers can say something bullshit and no one's allowed to reply, or no one's allowed to criticize them, or even no one's allowed to have their own opinion back? I think that when you've got a huge platform, and especially when you're famous and rich, you have the media pretty much will republish anything you say. It's part of having a political opinion. If you're famous, that people are going to retaliate whatever you say. So I think one of the ways this gets weaponized, particularly against trans people, I mean, I'm sure it does against lots of activist groups, but particularly against trans people, is there's this kind of idea that the gender critical side is trying to spin, that trans people are scared of debate, or they don't want to debate, or, you know, they can't support their views, or that, you know, they just want to shut people down, and that's their only way that they can get their position across. And this comes partly from the fact that trans people don't have these people with huge platforms, and they don't have the traditional media supporting them, and you know, they're quite marginalized. So there's always this kind of power imbalance,
right,
where, you know, if you when you're a cis person and a billionaire and a celebrity, you can say something, it just doesn't affect you. Like, you're completely unaffected. Whereas it, you know, to the lots of trans people, it like can turn their world upside down and they have no voice or anything. And so, like, saying no debate, like, why should you be able to debate some trans person's life? Or you know, you're saying that we should take their rights. It's just nonsense. So people say, oh, well, we shouldn't be debating this, but then that sounds a bit like you're not allowed to say your opinion. And
Right.
they want to sell it like that because they want to get all the free speech people on board. Trans people don't like freedom of speech, which is obviously just nonsense because, I mean, trans people have not had freedom of speech for like thousands of years, and this is the first time ever in the history of humanity trans people have been able to even talk about being trans.
Right? Talk about freedom of expression, but not that way. That's not okay.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if that addresses your question. That was a bit of a ramble.
No, that makes sense. I think that focusing on the cancel culture element, which is something that we've talked about, I believe, on this show before, I've talked about before on other streams, that is like a larger conversation, and I'm pretty sure it's a pretty good catch-all for any person saying anything remotely, you know, out there, to be like, oh yes, I agree with this because my view, my statement is currently coming under fire and it's uncomfortable. It is kind of a leveling of the playing field. It's a loss of that privilege, as you were saying, to be able to say anything you want to say and not be held accountable. Social capital on the internet is pretty much the same across the board, right? You can have more of it, but that also means that you are more likely to encounter people who disagree with you and who then decide to take their social capital elsewhere. So yeah, I think that it's an uncomfortable situation.
Of ideas.
Right, exactly.
I think for trans people also it's, or for like people taking a transphobic position, it's quite shocking because, especially when you're a bit older, you've been able to say anything about trans people, literally unrestricted, for your entire life. Like they can have, you know, mainstream films where the punchline of the whole thing is, oh, it's a man in a dress, or like trans people can be on, like we have had a really good comedy in the 90s or early 2000s where one of the episodes, the entire episode was just themed around, haha, she's a man. And the last half of it is just this man beating her up to a laugh track.
Oh,
and like, I watched that when I was like a teenager, and you know, that was normal. So the idea that all of a sudden, like, you know, when you go from that extreme where that's just like acceptable or even good, that's encouraged, and then suddenly it's like, well, you're not allowed to say that anymore. Not only are you not allowed to do the extreme stuff anymore, but you know, the post has moved so far that to you it seems like shutting down your freedom of speech. All of the opinions you have on trans people are trash. So if you say any of them, people are going to call you out, and suddenly it sounds like, feels to you
like can't say anything. Exactly. Learn new things to say.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that for trans people, there's a huge range, you know, and even in some places in the UK, there are going to be places where the transphobic view from the 70s is still just normal. And there are other places where transphobia is totally unacceptable and they're like next to each other online. So
exactly. There are no boundaries like that on Twitter, fortunately and unfortunately.